I never imagined that the silence of my own children would hurt more than the distance. They went to live in the United States in search of a better life, and they achieved it. They work hard, live well, appear smiling in beautiful places. Those who look from the outside think it's a success story. But what no one sees is what was left behind. The calls that gradually diminished, the conversations that became quick, the promises of, "I'll call you later," that almost never came through. And, little by little, I stopped being part of their routine. Today, I find myself staring at my phone, waiting for a call that may not even come, while trying to understand at what point I became merely a memory in the lives of my own children. But there is one thing I haven't told yet, and that was what changed everything inside me. I never imagined that silence could hurt so much. The house was always full of voices, of laughter, of small arguments about silly things, full of life. My children grew up running from one side to the other, fighting over the TV remote, asking for food all the time, complaining about school, dreaming about the future. And I was always there, in the middle of everything, organizing, caring, listening, living for them. Now, at 52 years old, I find myself sitting in the same room, on the same sofa, and all I hear is the clock on the wall. Both of them left for the United States. I remember the day they told me. They were excited, their eyes shining, talking about opportunities, about growth, about a better life. They said that over there everything was different, that they could study more, work, achieve independence. I smiled. Of course I smiled. What kind of mother would I be if I didn't support my own children's dreams? But inside, something was already breaking. Back then, they promised that nothing would change. "Amma, we'll call every day. Amma, you'll see, it'll be just like we're here. Amma, there's video calling now. It's easy." I believed them. In the beginning, it really was like that. They called me frequently. They wanted to show me everything. The small apartment they shared at first, the first snow they saw, the different supermarkets, the well-organized parks, the clean streets. I was enchanted seeing everything through my phone screen, as if I were traveling alongside them. I asked if they were eating well. I asked if they were sleeping properly. I asked if they were happy, and they always said yes. But time has a strange way of changing things without us noticing. The calls started getting shorter, then less frequent. Before it was every day, then it became once a week, then whenever possible. "Amma, I'm very busy. Amma, I had a long day. Amma, I'll talk to you later, okay?" And that later sometimes took days. I tried not to complain. I told myself it was normal. They were building their lives. They were working hard. That was what they had always wanted, wasn't it? But then, I would open my phone, and there they were. Photos smiling in beautiful places, videos in expensive restaurants, trips to cities I only knew by name. New clothes, new friends, new lives. Time for all of that, but not for a call of a few minutes. That's when it really started to hurt. I remember one specific night. I had made my oldest son's favorite dish, even knowing he wasn't there. I did it out of habit, or perhaps out of longing. The food was ready, and I looked at the table. Too many plates for one person. I sat down anyway, put the food on my plate, and before starting to eat, I picked up my phone. I sent a message. "Son, can you talk for a little while?" I saw that he had read it. I waited. Minutes, then an hour. Nothing. Later he replied, "Amma, sorry, I'm at work. I'll call you tomorrow." The next day, he didn't call. I don't know exactly when I started to feel left behind. It wasn't all at once. It happened gradually, like a faucet dripping inside the heart until everything fills up. Sometimes I wonder if I did something wrong, if I was too strict when they were younger, if I didn't show enough love, if I should have prepared them better, or perhaps prepared myself better for this moment, because no one talks about this. Everyone talks about the pride of seeing children go abroad, about success, about opportunities, about how good it is for the family. But no one talks about the silence that remains. No one talks about the longing that never goes away. No one talks about what it's like to watch your children living an entire life without you truly being part of it. One day, my neighbor asked about them. She said she saw a photo online, that they looked very well, very happy. I smiled and said, yes, they're great. But what I wanted to say was something else. I wanted to say that I miss the sound of their voices calling Amma through the house, that I miss the silly arguments, that I even miss the worries, because now I don't even really know what happens in their lives anymore. They tell me the basics, enough to say everything is fine, but they don't share the details anymore. They don't ask for my advice anymore. They don't tell me their secrets anymore. And that hurts more than any distance. Sometimes I stare at their photos for a long time, trying to understand at what moment I stopped being part of that world, or perhaps at what moment that world stopped needing me. I never said this to them, never had the courage, because deep down, I'm afraid of the answer. I'm afraid that they really are fine without me, and I still haven't learned to be fine without them. I started to notice that it wasn't just the frequency of the calls that had changed. It was the way. Before, when my children talked to me, there was calm. They asked about my day, wanted to know about the small things, whether I had gone to the temple, whether the neighbor had stopped by, whether I was eating well. There was time. There was presence. Now, it always feels like a race. Amma, talk fast. Amma, I'm heading out. Amma, I'll call you later when I have time. But that, when I have time, almost never comes. And when it does, it's no longer the same. I feel as if I'm talking to polite strangers. They still call me Amma. They still ask if I'm well. They still say they miss me. But there is a distance that is not physical. It is emotional. It's as if a part of them stayed behind, and another part left forever. One day, I tried something different. I thought, maybe the problem is that I only wait for them to call me. So I gathered my courage and called myself. It was early there for them. I knew that, but I called anyway. My heart was beating faster, as if I were a visitor asking for permission to enter my own children's lives. It rang, rang, rang. Nothing. I hung up. Minutes later, a message arrived. Amma, I'm at work. Is everything okay? I stared at that message for a long time. Is everything okay? That question seemed so distant, as if I were just another worry on their daily to-do list. I replied, yes, I just wanted to hear your voice. He replied with a heart emoji, an emoji. I can't explain it, but that gave me a deep sadness. Not because the gesture was bad, but because it replaced something so important. Before, he would have called me right away. He would have said, Amma, hold on. I'll talk to you. Now an emoji seems sufficient, and perhaps, for him, it really is. I started to observe more carefully, not just the messages, but their behavior. They always say they're busy, that they work a lot, that life in the United States is hectic. I believe that. I know it isn't easy. I know they fought hard to get where they are. But then, I see social media. I see long videos. I see trips. I see gatherings with friends. I see dinners, parties, outings. I see time that doesn't reach me. And that creates a confusion inside my heart. I don't want to be unfair. I don't want to be that mother who demands too much. I always taught my children to be independent, to pursue their dreams, to not depend on anyone. But does independence mean forgetting? Does growing up mean distancing yourself from those who were always by your side? These questions stay in my head, especially at night. Nights are the hardest. During the day, I manage to distract myself. I do my chores, talk to some people, try to maintain my routine. But when night comes, everything goes silent again, and the silence brings thoughts. I remember when they were small and were afraid to sleep alone. I would stay by their side, tell stories, hold their hand until they fell asleep. Now, I'm the one who has difficulty sleeping, not out of fear, but out of longing. One day, I found an old box in the wardrobe. Inside were drawings they made when they were children. Simple cards with crooked letters saying things like, Amma, I love you, and you are the best mother in the world. I sat on the floor and started looking at everything. And without realizing it, I started to cry. It wasn't a loud cry. It was silent, as if my body had already grown accustomed to holding everything inside. I kept thinking, at what moment did those words cease to exist? Today they still love me. I know that. But their love has changed. And perhaps mine has changed too. Before, my love was full of presence. Now, it is full of waiting. I wait for a call. I wait for a message. I wait for an, Amma, I have time today. And this waiting is tiring. Not the body, but the heart. There was a day when my youngest son finally called me on video. I was so happy that I even fixed my hair before answering. When the call connected, he was walking on the street with earphones in, looking around, clearly busy. "Amma, I only have 5 minutes." 5 minutes. I smiled anyway. Asked how he was doing, said I missed him, tried to make the most of every second. But while I was talking, he was looking at his phone, replying to messages, getting distracted. And at one point, he said, "Amma, I'm going to have to hang up. We'll talk better later." Later. Always later. The call ended, and the screen went black. I kept staring at the phone as if something was still going to happen, but nothing did. It was on that day that something inside me changed a little. For the first time, I thought, perhaps I'm trying to hold on to something that is no longer the way it used to be. And that idea frightened me, because if that is true, then I need to learn to live in a way I never imagined, a way in which my children exist but are not present, and I don't know if I'm ready for that. After that 5-minute call, I spent days thinking, not just about my children, but about myself. I realized that for years, my entire life revolved around them. Every decision I made took their well-being into account. Every plan, every effort, every worry had their faces. When they were small, I lived to protect them. When they grew up, I lived to prepare them. And when they left, I kept living to wait for them. Perhaps that was my mistake. Not loving too much, because a mother's love is never too much. The mistake was forgetting to build a life that was also mine. I realized this on an ordinary morning. I woke up early, as always, made tea, tidied the house, organized everything. And when I finished, I sat in the living room not knowing what to do. The house was clean, the food was ready, the entire day ahead, and no purpose. It was as if I had spent so many years occupied with the children that I had never learned to exist without caring for them. This realization shook me deeply, because I began to understand that the pain of distance didn't come only from their absence. It also came from the emptiness that was left inside me. I always thought I only missed my children, but in truth, I missed the woman I was when they needed me, because when they needed me, I had a clear place in the world. Now, it feels as if my place has become undefined. No one calls me to help with homework anymore. No one asks for my advice on simple problems anymore. No one walks into the kitchen asking what there is to eat anymore. These small things, which once seemed tiring, are now deeply missed. And I started to notice something else, too. I wasn't just homesick. I was hurt. Hurt because I expected from them the same intensity that I offered. Hurt because even understanding that they were busy, a part of me believed that if they wanted to, they would find the time. Hurt because I felt replaced by a new life, and admitting that to myself was painful, because mothers are taught to understand everything, to forgive everything, to accept everything. But no one teaches a mother how to deal with the feeling of no longer being a priority. I always imagined that, even as adults, my children would remain emotionally close. I thought that the physical distance would be compensated by the connection of the heart. But what I discovered is that adult life changes relationships. Responsibilities change, priorities change, and sometimes the intensity of the bond changes too. Accepting that seemed almost like a betrayal, because for me, the love never changed. I still think of them when I wake up, still worry whether they are eating well, still pray for them every day, still feel the urge to tell them every little thing. My love remains whole, but their love now shares space with so many other things: work, friends, bills, plans, exhaustion. And perhaps that is natural, but natural doesn't mean easy. That week, I decided to visit an old friend. She also has children living abroad. We talked for hours. At one point, I told her how I was feeling. I spoke of the sadness, the waiting, the sense of abandonment. She listened to everything calmly and then said a phrase that stayed in my mind. Perhaps your children haven't left you behind. Perhaps they simply moved forward and you stayed still waiting. In the moment, that hurt. It seemed harsh. But then I realized there was truth in it. They moved forward. They built a routine. They built a life. They built new habits. While I remained stuck in the expectation of continuing to occupy the same space as before. I wanted to continue being the center, but their lives already had new centers. Understanding that was like losing something for the second time. The first loss was when they left. The second was when I realized I could not expect everything to remain the same. That night, I sat alone and cried again, but it was a different cry, not only of longing, it was a cry of understanding. For the first time, I began to accept that my children were not trying to hurt me. They were simply living, and perhaps I had been turning their living into a personal rejection. This doesn't mean the pain disappeared. It still hurts when I see photos of them smiling without me. It still hurts when they promise to call and don't. It still hurts when I realize they know more about their friends than about me. But now I understand that there is a difference between abandonment and change. They didn't abandon me, but the relationship changed, and I was resisting accepting that change. The question then stopped being, why don't they call me anymore? And became, who am I now, beyond being a mother? That question frightened me, because I didn't know how to answer. I had spent decades being defined by caregiving, by service, by constant presence. Now, without that central function, I needed to discover another version of myself. But how to do that at 52 years old? How to rebuild an identity when you have spent so much time living for others? I had no answer. I only knew that continuing to wait for calls that didn't come was slowly destroying me. I needed to find another path, not to love my children less, but to depend less on their presence in order to feel alive. It was a new idea, difficult, almost frightening, but perhaps it was necessary, because if I continued living only in the expectation of their attention, I would end up losing my own life. And for the first time, I realized that I also deserved to live. After everything I had begun to realize, something inside me changed, but not all at once. It's not as if I woke up one day and thought, now everything is fine. No, the pain was still there, the longing too. But little by little, I began to look at my own life with more attention. For the first time in a long while, I asked myself, what do I like? It seems like a simple question, but for me it wasn't. For years, everything I liked was tied to my children. I liked cooking because they liked eating. I liked going out because they wanted to go on outings. I liked watching certain programs because that's what we watched together. Without them, I no longer knew what made me feel well. In the first days, I felt lost. But then, I started with small things. I returned to the temple more frequently. Not just on special days, but on ordinary days. I would sit in silence, observe the people, listen to the prayers, and little by little, that place began to bring me a peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I also started talking more with people my own age. I discovered that I was not alone. There were other mothers, other women, who also had children living far away in other countries, living other lives. Some spoke about it naturally, others with hidden sadness, others with a mixture of both, and it was there that I realized something important. My story was not unique, and at the same time, that both comforted and frightened me, because it meant that this pain was part of many people's lives, but it also meant that perhaps there was a way to learn to deal with it. I started to observe these women. Some were always waiting, always looking at their phones, always lamenting the lack of attention from their children. Others seemed lighter. They felt longing, yes. They spoke of their children with love, but they didn't seem trapped by their absence. I wanted to understand the difference. One of these women, a little older than me, said something I will never forget. When our children were small, we were their world. But now, we need to rebuild our own world. That phrase kept echoing in my mind. Build my own world. It was strange to think about that at 52 years old. But at the same time, it made sense. I started to try. I went back to doing simple things I had abandoned. I started walking in the mornings. At first, it was just to fill the time. But then I began to notice the trees, the people, the sky, small details that I had never had time to observe before. I also went back to cooking, but in a different way. Before, I cooked to please my children. Now, I started experimenting with recipes that I wanted to try. It seemed like something small, but for me, it was a beginning. And little by little, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. A slight sense of control over my own life. But not everything was easy. There were days when I relapsed. Days when I opened my phone and saw photos of them smiling, traveling, living, and felt that pain return with force. Days when I thought, why can't they just call? Days when I almost sent long messages, demanding, asking, venting. On some of those days, I did send them, and most of the time, the response was similar. Amma, sorry, I'm busy. Amma, don't be like that. Amma, you know that I love you. Those responses weren't bad, but they weren't what I needed either. I needed presence, and presence cannot be sent through a message. It was then that I realized something else that was hard to accept. I cannot control how much my children participate in my life, but I can control how much I allow that to destroy me. That idea was tough, because deep down, I still wanted them to change, wanted them to call more, wanted them to miss me more, wanted them to feel my absence the way I feel theirs. But for the first time, I began to understand that waiting for that could keep me trapped forever. And I no longer wanted to live trapped. Not in longing, not in expectation, not in silence. It was during this period that something unexpected happened. My youngest son called me without warning. It was late at night here. When I saw his name on the screen, my heart raced like before. I answered quickly, Amma? Just hearing his voice, I felt my eyes fill with tears. But this time, I didn't want to cry. I took a deep breath and replied calmly, Hi, my son. The call was different. He seemed calmer. He talked about work, about exhaustion, about some difficulties he didn't usually mention. And for the first time in a long while, he truly listened to me. I told him about my routine, about the temple, about the walks. I didn't talk about the pain. I didn't talk about the hard nights, but I talked about myself, and that was already something new. Before hanging up, he said, Amma, it's good to know you're doing well. That phrase stayed with me, because perhaps, without realizing it, I had always only shown them my longing, and not my life. Perhaps, just perhaps, when they feel I'm doing well, the conversation flows differently. I don't know. I'm still learning. But that call showed me something important. The relationship may not be like before, but it doesn't have to be empty either. Perhaps there is a new way for us to connect, a different way, more distant, but still real. And perhaps the first step toward that is me learning to exist without depending entirely on them, not to love them less, but so as not to lose myself. After that unexpected call from my youngest son, something changed inside me, but this time it was more quiet. It wasn't a change full of emotion, nor a strong decision like, now things will be different. It was more like a calm understanding, almost as if my heart was finally beginning to accept the new reality. I realized that there was still room for connection, just not in the way I insisted on wanting, and that made me reflect on something difficult. Perhaps all this time, I had been trying to relive the past, while my children were already living the present, and living trapped in the past is exhausting. In the days that followed, I made a simple decision, but one that was very important to me. I stopped waiting, not in the sense of ceasing to love, but of ceasing to live in function of the next call, the next message, the next sign of attention. If they called, I would answer with love. If they didn't call, I would carry on with my day. It seems like a small thing, but for me, it was liberating, because for the first time in a long while, I didn't start the day thinking about them. I started thinking about myself, and that caused me a little guilt at first, as if I were being selfish. But then I realized it wasn't selfishness. It was balance. I still prayed for them every morning, still thought of them during the day, still felt longing, but I no longer let that control everything inside me. And, curiously, when I stopped pressuring, something began to change on their side too. The conversations became lighter. When they called, I no longer started with complaints hidden in the form of questions. I no longer said, "You never call." I no longer asked, "You have time for everything but me?" Instead, I simply talked, simple as that. And I noticed something I hadn't seen before. When there is no pressure, there is more space. My oldest son started sending voice messages from time to time, short, but more natural. He would tell me simple things, something funny that happened at work, a new dish he tried, a difficulty he faced during the week. Before, I might not have valued those details as much, but now, I recognize their worth, because it's not about the quantity of time. It's about the quality of presence. Of course, there are still difficult days. Days when I see photos of them in beautiful places and feel that pang in my heart. Days when I wish they would remember to call me without me needing to give any sign. Days when I miss the old version of our relationship. But at the same time, I started to see something new. I didn't lose my children. I lost the old way of relating to them. And that is different. Because losing someone is definitive. But changing a relationship still leaves room to rebuild. And it was with that thought that I also began to act differently. I started sharing more of my life with them. Before, I waited for them to ask. Now, sometimes I send a simple message. Today, I went to the temple and remembered you. Or, I walked early today. The day was beautiful. Without pressure, without hidden messages, just sharing. And, to my surprise, they started responding more. Not always, but more than before. And that already made a difference. I also started to accept something I had been resisting greatly. They are happy there. And that should be enough for me. Not in the sense of erasing my longing, but of reminding me that everything I did for them had a purpose. I raised them to be strong, to seek opportunities, to build their own lives. And that is exactly what they did. Perhaps the problem was never them having gone away. Perhaps the problem was me not being prepared for the emptiness that would leave behind. But now, little by little, that emptiness is being filled in another way, not with their presence, but with the rebuilding of my own life. One day, I noticed something that surprised me. I had spent an entire afternoon occupied, sorting things out, talking, walking. And when I got home, I realized I hadn't looked at my phone a single time waiting for a message from them. And for the first time, that didn't bother me. It gave me a sense of peace. Not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped depending. And perhaps that is the balance I needed to find. To love without erasing myself. To feel longing without losing myself. To be available without living in waiting. I'm still learning. I still have days of relapse. I still feel that tightening in my chest sometimes. But now I know that my life cannot remain still waiting for theirs to slow down, because that is not going to happen. They are moving forward. And finally, so am I. Today, when I look back, I can see more clearly everything I lived through in these past years. My children's departure was not just a change in their lives, it was a complete transformation in mine. In the beginning, I thought I had lost everything. Then I realized I hadn't lost my children. I had lost the role I played in their lives, and that, for a mother, can be just as painful. But I also learned something no one ever taught me. We spend our entire lives preparing our children to leave, but we almost never prepare ourselves for when that actually happens. I prepared my children for the world, but I didn't prepare my heart for the silence. I didn't prepare my days for the absence. I didn't prepare my identity to exist beyond motherhood, and perhaps that is why it hurts so much. Today, I still feel longing. That will never change. I still look at their photos and smile, and sometimes cry too. I still hope for a call on special days. I still feel happy when I see their names appear on the screen. But something inside me is different. I no longer live in function of that. I no longer wake up with a heavy heart waiting for attention. I no longer end the day frustrated because they didn't call. I learned to live, even with the distance. And that doesn't mean I became cold. It means I became stronger. Recently, I had a conversation that was very meaningful. My oldest son called me, and this time the call was long. We talked calmly, we laughed, we reminisced about old times. And, at one point, he said something that made me think, "Amma, sometimes I worry about you. I think about whether you are too alone." I took a deep breath before answering, because for the first time, I knew what to say. I miss you, yes, but I am doing well. And I was speaking the truth. That moved me more than anything else, because I realized I didn't need to hide my longing, but I also didn't need to live dominated by it. We continued talking, and I noticed something important. When I stopped positioning myself as someone who only waits, I became someone they genuinely talk to, not out of obligation, but by choice. And that changes everything. Because love born from obligation weighs heavy, but love that comes from choice brings people closer. Today, our relationship is different. We don't talk every day. Sometimes a week passes, sometimes more. But when we talk, there is truth, there is genuine interest, there is exchange, and above all, there is respect for each other's space. I no longer try to control their time, and curiously, they started to value mine more. One day, my youngest son said, "Amma, you seem lighter." I smiled, because he was right. I am lighter, not because the longing ended, but because I stopped fighting against reality. Accepting doesn't mean giving up. It means stopping suffering over what cannot be controlled and focusing on what can still be lived. Today, my life has new meanings. I have my routine, my walks, my conversations, my small joys, and in the middle of all that, my children continue to be part of my life, not as before, but they still are, and that is enough. If I could say something to other mothers who are going through what I went through, I would say, don't expect your children to remain the same. They will grow, they will change, they will build other priorities, and that doesn't mean they stopped loving you. It simply means they are living. But you also need to live. Your life doesn't end when your children leave. It changes, and as hard as it is to accept that, it can also be the beginning of something new. I am still a mother. That will never change. But now, I am also more than that. And perhaps that has been the greatest lesson of all, learning to love my children from a distance, without losing myself.